Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. What a good group. My name is Zach Russ. I'm the curator here at the Earl Scruggs Center. And I'm not going to talk for too long because we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Natalie Bishop, who is the Associate Dean and University Archivist at the Dover Library at Gardner-Webb University. So what we're going to be talking about today is a project that Gardner-Webb and the Earl Scruggs Center has kind of partnered on. We are working on digitizing the Cleveland County Historical Collection. And so what Natalie's going to talk about today is kind of the first round of that process, kind of some of the first objects that we took in, which were donated by Ralph Gardner, and then also some objects that were found in the museum. And so I encourage you all to, after we're done, take a look at some of the things we have out here, which you're going to see Natalie's going to kind of talk about. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Natalie to kind of talk about their part of it.
All right. So we're really glad that you guys are here today. So with the Cleveland County Collection, you have a variety of different types of objects. So the way that we digitize and capture those objects and then display them online is going to be really different depending on the type of object that we're working with. So with documents, like the ones that we have here on the table, we use an archive quality scanner, which is a little bit different than the types of scanners that you get at OfficeMax. OfficeMax scanners are great, but we need to scan at a higher resolution. So that way, the image that we scan and have available online looks a lot like the original document. So just to give you guys an example, give that a minute to load up. So this is a document that was signed by George Washington in the early 1800s. Do you remember the date on that one? Oh, late 1700s. And we have the original here in this case. So this is an oversized document, so we had to scan it on an overhead cradle scanner. And this is not something that you would typically have at home. The scanning process is actually kind of slow. So it's not something that I can scan and have ready to go online in like 5 or 10 minutes. It usually takes about 2 minutes for the scanner to actually fully scan the document. Then we have to make sure that it's cropped and oriented properly before we can put it online. So I'd like to show you guys a video of what scanning for this particular document actually looks like. We'll see if I can.
We should have a counselor here next month, so we won't have to do it.
Well, while that's loading, do you guys have any questions about digitization? Yes.
Is it online now? I mean, is it, can a person look at that document now?
Not yet. So I'll explain the last part of that process, but it will be online soon. But that is a great question. All right. So now we have some tackle that. We don't get the sound, I can explain what's happening in the video. That's all. So, as that's loading, I'll go ahead and talk about the next part of the process. We don't just scan stuff, slap it on a website, and just kind of cast it out there into the internet. What we do as archivists and as curators, we have to describe that object, and we also have to tag it online so that people can find it. Oh, there we go. Alright, so this is the scanner that I was talking about, and this is our Book-Eye Cradle Bed scanner. Underneath the document, I have an oversized piece of acid-free paper. The acid-free paper just protects the document from the scan bed, and it won't cause any damage to the document itself. One of the reasons I like to put the acid-free paper underneath is that as you're scanning, you may do an initial scan and then realize, oh, I've got my document a little bit crooked, and while the software on the scanner, you can make things straighter, it takes a really long time. So I found that it's quicker if I can just adjust the document. But you don't want to go scrubbing like a 200-year-old document around on the scan bed. That's just not a good idea. So since it's sitting on top of the acid-free paper, I can shift the document by shifting the paper that's underneath. And then it's easy to just crop those sides out where the white overlays. And so that way I can do a more efficient scan time-wise, but I'm not scrubbing my document, I'm protecting it properly. So there I'm talking about shifting it around. And in just a minute, you'll actually see the scanner in action. Let me just fast forward just a little bit. And so you see the scan itself doesn't take too long, and we get an initial image, but for the final image to render and load, that's the part that takes a long time. I would say total time that we spent on that particular document was probably about 20 minutes, which doesn't maybe sound like that much time, but if you have 100 of those documents, and 20 minutes, it starts to add up. So what we do after something's already scanned, first, I give the file name a name that has meaning. So Zach has accession numbers, which are object identifiers. So that way we can always correspond the digital file to the physical object. You want to keep the back of your house clean. It's kind of like when you invite guests over and you want to make sure that like your living room and your kitchen is clean and put together. Well, in the archive world, yes, you want your living room and your kitchen put together and looking clean and nice, but you also want your pantry to look good too. Because you want to be able to find everything in your pantry and use it properly. So we like to give our files names that match the actual object. Then, before we go putting that object online, we want to describe it so that people, when they see that document, they understand what they found. When you guys walk through an exhibit that Zach has put together, he's designed it in a very specific way. You enter through a specific door. You see things in a certain order so that it tells the story that Zach was trying to tell as a curator. With objects like these that are online, people may find it through a Google search. They may not enter the collection where, I would consider the beginning. They can enter from any point. So when I describe that letter online, I have to provide some context so people understand what is this thing that I have found, from any entry point. So I have to make sure that I think about this document in terms of describing what it is, in terms of describing what it is in the context of the people that created it, so understanding it in George Washington's time period, but also understanding it in our time period today. The language that we use today is a little bit different than the language that they used during George Washington's time. We don't speak exactly the same. We don't call things exactly the same way. So I have to think about both of those ways of communicating so that I incorporate both types of language so that modern people today can find that object, but also like historians who are going to be thinking in the language of George Washington's time period, that they can find it too. So if I think about a larger range of an audience. When we upload those documents online, we have like a little short image preview, but we also make sure that it can be downloaded both as like a JPEG or a PDF and then shared with other people. Because if you can't share it, then like what good is it? You know, we just don't want it to like languish there online and nobody get to interact with it. So we want to make sure that it's also really shareable. So that's also part of our goals. Do you want to jump in? Because I feel like I've been talking about
Does anybody have any questions so far? I feel like you just got a lot of information.
Yep.
I mean, when you can access, and somebody like me can access this online and it's available, will there be search criteria to go to a specific item?
Yes and no. I know that's not the answer people want to. So we will build the collection in such a way that you can get to the collection landing page and easily get to, like, say that George Washington letter. But we're also going to set it up that if you know there's a specific thing that you want to see, like I want to see the George Washington letter, you can do a Google search, Cleveland County, George Washington, and that letter's going to come up in a Google search. So we want to make sure that people can get to it through the collection page, but also just Google it.
Yep.
Yes.
Where do you usually find these things?
So these are all out of the collection that we have from the original museum that was here before the Earl Scruggs Center. This collection was started around 1976 for the bicentennial, and then after that museum closed, the county took ownership of the collection and placed it in an off-site storage facility.
Where did they originally find something that would go with it? Should be yard sale or somebody donated?
That's a bigger question. Yeah, so by and large, and I'll say this now, the collection as it stands is closed. We don't take in any new donations just because of how much we have. Now, the Earl Scruggs Center has a collection that is open, but our criteria is different than the old collection, so we take in different things. However, usually what it was at that time, in 1976, is it was a giant campaign based around the bicentennial. And so the Cleveland County Historical Society or Association, I can't remember what they were called, put out a big call and said, if you have things that you would want to donate, we're starting this museum. And so people from the community came and donated things. That's how we ended up with Ralph Gardner's collection, because the other connection here is that Gardner-Webb itself has a fair amount of the Gardner family collection that Faye Gardner had given to the university. And then did you guys get some things from Ralph too?
Max.
Okay, from Omax III. And then whenever they started the collection, Ralph gave some things to us. And so they live in the Gardner family, I guess you could say archives at this point, live in two different locations. We have some of it and Gardner-Webb has some of it. So that's why we decided to start with Ralph's collection as a starting point, because it was self-contained and it was easy for them to kind of scan. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I did or not. Basically, usually it's people come to us. In the history world, that's normally how it goes. Now, in the art world, you'll see museums going out and purchasing artworks or working with families to get artworks from galleries and things like that. It's a little different. But yeah, so that's mainly how we get our collections too.
How many documents were in Ralph's collection?
Don't know.
10?
There's maybe a dozen or
I
so.
think probably 10 or fewer paper documents and probably 10 to 12 artifacts.
Yeah, there's 3D objects as well, which I'm sure Natalie will talk about. They're kind of similar to the cigarette case up here. And then in terms of the collection as a whole, there are thousands of documents. And so that's why when Natalie says it took 20 minutes to do the George Washington letter, you have to multiply that by about 5,000. And then that's how long it's going to take to scan every document in the collection. So the number one thing I say every time we talk about this project with people is, because I know it's super exciting, and the number one thing I tell them is it's going to be a long project. It'll take years and years to get it all done, because while we have maybe 5,000 or 6,000 documents, we also have about 5,000 or 6,000 objects that, and then we have, you know, I mean, you name it, we have it. There's an entire warehouse full of stuff from the original museum that at one point was in this courthouse, and I don't really know how they were able to walk around in here at that time because of just how much stuff there is. But yeah, is there any other questions?
I was just, looking at your scanner setup, something like a daguerreotype where, you know, like it's tilted just an inch. You're looking at the negative instead of
Yes.
the actual image. Did you do those like quickly with the scanner, or do you have to set up still photography for it, or how?
We do both. We have a tintype in the Fenway Gardner collection that's of the Andrews family. And so we did both. We did it on the scanner, and then we also did still photography. And the two images look slightly different, but we felt like it was important to capture it both ways.
Okay. Anybody else before we continue on? Nope. All right. Do you want to talk about 3D stuff and kind of
Yeah.
how that works?
So you'll notice, and I hope you guys will come up afterwards and take a look, we've got a lot of different 3D objects. And the thing about 3D objects is they have stuff on all sides, sometimes the inside. And to just do a scan doesn't really do the object justice. It doesn't give you a really good idea of what this is or what it's all about. So we decided to use photography, high resolution photography, to digitize those items. We have a professional grade camera, and we set these up in our Lightbox. And we'll go ahead and turn the light on the Lightbox. And you can see it really kind of floods the area with light. Even though the sides are really shiny, that adds reflected light from the side. We can photograph from the top. We can photograph straight on. We can also photograph through a smaller hole. So you can really frame out the object in a lot of different ways. And the result is very, very different than what you would get with your iPhone just sitting on a table. So once we get finished, if you have your phone with you, we're going to set an object out on the table and then leave one object in the Lightbox. And I encourage you to take a picture of both and just see the difference just with your phone. It's really amazing the difference that the Lightbox makes. So with the cigarette case, we wanted to capture obviously the front. But there was a really cool engraving on the inside. This is a Tiffany cigarette case, is that right? And so we've got this really great detailing here. And then that's the different.
And in that photograph, you can see the one from the inside of the cigarette case. You can see why it's important to have so many angles of light inside of the Lightbox, because you would have so many shadows in that situation, covering up lettering, covering up details, and that's why it's so important to have as much light as possible around the object.
Can you read that description to us?
Natalie,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Governor O. Max Gardner, in appreciation of his eloquent address at the Hotel Vanderbilt in New York City, November the 1st, 1934, from his friends of the Pepperell Manufacturing Company, a New England tribute to North Carolina. And what's really cool about photographing in the Lightbox as opposed to a table, you can really see the object without distraction. So we have good lighting, we don't have shadows that take away from the things that you would want to see, And so that's really what you want when you want to present an object online. But we also decided to incorporate, this video does not have sound on purpose. We also wanted to incorporate video, so we purchased a turntable so that way we can also upload a 360 view of the object video.
And as I said, the ideal for this is that all the objects from the collection will have some form of this kind of treatment. Now, there are some objects which will prove to be too large to do this kind of stuff with. However, for the smaller objects, I think that's the way we're going to try to attack it. And so again, it takes a lot of time to do all this stuff.
And we do have a larger light box that's large enough a person can get inside of it. But we even have objects that are too big for that. And so once we get to those items, we'll probably build some type of homemade light box so that we can capture those items. But that'll probably be the last thing that we do.
Yeah, and once we're towards the end, I'll talk about next steps and kind of how we're looking at doing things moving forward logistically.
So there's some objects that we found because they are small. They didn't photograph as cleanly as we would like with the initial camera lens that we purchased. So we realized that we needed, and you can see that this is kind of grainy. It's really not the quality that we're looking for. So and I brought this specific image on purpose because it was kind of grainier, and this is the trial and error. This is the part that does take a little bit of time. We realized, hey, this camera lens is not the best one for these tiny objects. And this is right in front of the cigarette case, so you can see scalability of the difference. But we got a different camera lens. And you can see it turned out a lot more clearly. We did have to get creative for how to photograph some of these things so that we could capture all of the angles. But that's also part of just what we do. You just have to be creative. So you can see the difference in quality. But all of that sort of trial and error to capture the best image, it takes a lot of time. So while there are standards, you've got to be really sort of flexible and have time for that flexibility.
And this pocket watch was given to Caitlin Garner, I believe, by her mother.
Yep, so it has 05 here on the front, and that is the year that she graduated from the Lucid Pop Institute in, I think it's in Athens, Georgia. And then these are her initials on the reverse. So, what are some other questions that you guys have?
Okay.
Just one number on these documents.
Well, so what we're going to do, I think the easiest thing to do is going to be open it up to people who want to kind of hang out and learn about them, and we'll kind of one-on-one with people. I think that's going to be the easiest way to handle it, so that way there's not too many people kind of crowding around things, and so that way, number one also is that we ask that you not touch any of the documents on the table. Some of them are well over 200 years old, so we just ask that you be careful with them. But real quick, I want to talk about kind of next steps. Oh yeah, and we have printouts too. So if anybody's interested in wanting to, kind of see them a little more close and kind of handle them, we'll have some printouts of the different ones on the table here. But in terms of next steps, what we are now doing is we are working on what is most at risk first in terms of condition. We decided that as far as documents are concerned, that was going to be the best thing to do, because there are some documents in the collection that are very delicate and will probably not last a very long time. And so getting those digitized as soon as possible will allow us to be able to use them in the future whenever it might not be possible for me to bring them out and put them on a table anymore. And then also what we're going to do after that then is systematically go through via the accession numbers that Natalie was talking about. We're going to go through and just systematically knock out every single document in the collection, and then we'll move to 3D objects and do that the same way, just one at a time, work our way through. We haven't decided how we really want to do that yet. I know there was some interest to do clothing first, which I'm all for. It doesn't matter to me as long as it gets done. So we're talking about doing clothing first, which we probably, I hate to guess how many pieces of clothing we have in the collection. From our clothing collection probably goes from the late, I would argue, the late 1700s to the 1950s or 60s. So there's a lot there. And that'll give them a real opportunity to test themselves out on that Lightbox they were talking about, the bigger one. Because the idea would be that we'll dress mannequins in outfits and use that to kind of document how the clothing was formed and how it would be used. So that's kind of a look at next steps. We will also post on our social media whenever these things go live, so that way if anybody who follows us or follows the library will be able to see what the updates are. We're probably not going to do one of these sessions every time we do a new thing, because then that would take up most of the year. But I will also say that we have an intern that is working for us, and we will continue to have an intern. The Cleveland County was very nice to give us the funds to be able to hire an intern to help with this project. And so we will have an intern in perpetuity as long as the project takes. And that intern both helps me to be able to get stuff to Gardner Webb, and then helps Natalie at Gardner Webb do all this work that you're seeing. Last chance for any questions, and then what I think we'll do is, yep.
Since it is labor intensive, do you need computations?
Yes.
That's good. Yeah.
So one thing that Zach and I have talked about is all of these historical documents are handwritten. And one of the big things that we need help with is transcribing those documents so that it's easier for people to read. A lot of people now are not familiar with reading cursive handwriting. And so...
And I'll say, even if you are, and you can see that some of these are a challenge regardless.
Yes. So one thing that Zach and I would like to do in the future, like in the next couple of months, is to do a couple of transcription workshops. And for folks who are interested, we have letters, but we also have shorter, small documents that are, like receipt size. But we'd like to have those transcribed too. So we wouldn't just say like, hey, like here's this letter, go have fun. But we would actually walk you through the transcription process, and then be on hand to help with those transcriptions. So that's a big community thing that we would love to get you guys involved with if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be something that's very important, because the documents aren't really useful if you don't know what they say. And we don't really expect the average person doing a Google search to be able to understand cursive that was written 250 years ago, and the way that you formed words and the way that you talked was completely different. And so that's where it's really helpful to have people kind of help us out with that kind of stuff, because that's very labor intensive as well, that whole process. Any other questions? Yep. It's fine. That's why we're going to have you around.
I'm just very impressed that you got this wonderful equipment, and is that funded for a grant to Gardner Webb, or was that part of fundraising, and do you need more money and all this?
So the scanner that you saw was actually a gift to our University Archives from Max Gardner III and the Roner Foundation. So they funded that for us. And then we got a grant through the North Carolina Public Library Association and IMLS, which is the Museum and Libraries federal grant system, that funded our Lightbox and our camera. but there are always needs going forward. So that's something that Zach and I can find specific needs. We may reach out for additional funding to people who are interested. So right now, with the county funding and with the grants and the gift from the Gardner Foundation, we've got what we need to complete this stage. But as we move forward, sometimes you don't know what needs you have until you find the object that you realize you don't have the equipment necessary.
And I will say again, it's such a great blessing for us that the county, when they were more or less had the collection sat in our lap, they were really quick to step up and make sure that it was being taken care of. All of the storage items that we use, boxes, archival-free sleeves, that kind of stuff is all funded by the county as well. And then they also maintain our storage space and gave us the storage space that we use to house the collection. And like I said, they're also helping us out with our intern. So it's really nice to have a local government that cares so much about its history and really wants to help preserve that. It's very important.
Tell us what the documents are, so when we get up here, we already know what we're going to be seeing.
Sure. Well, I can give you a quick overview. So basically, what's on the table is three different sets of letters. There are letters from the Gilchrist family, who were from Halifax, North Carolina, and we're working on how they got into our collection, because unfortunately, those letters were just found in the collection and didn't have proper accession numbers or paperwork with them. So we're working on the connection there. There's letters from the Martin family. We're not sure which Martin family. There's a bunch, and but they date back to the 1700s as well. And we're thinking, Natalie seems to think that there's a connection between the Martin family and the Gilchrist family. Maybe that's how the letters got lumped together. It was one collection. And then there's a random document, a letter on the far left side that's kind of tiny. And it is a letter from J.R. Logan to community members in Cleveland County at the time of North Carolina's secession during 1861. And he's writing back home, basically giving them an understanding of what was going on at the Capitol. And because he was the local representative that was part of those kind of proceedings. So that's a letter from him. In the case, we have Omax Gardner's North Carolina #1 license plate. We have Faye Gardner's opera glasses. We have Omax Gardner's wallet. We have the pocket watch that you saw. We have the cigarette case that you saw. We have a pen that LBJ used to sign legislation. And then we have the George Washington document, which is a shipping document. And then we have the original deed for Shelby, when they incorporated the city of Shelby. It's in that as well. So that's kind of a general overview. And like I said, Natalie and I will be hanging out. So as you guys are looking, if you have questions about certain things, feel free to ask us. Any other questions before we turn to this? Nothing? All right, well, come on and come take a look.